Hello, and thanks for tuning into Town Meeting TV coverage, General Elections 2024. My name is Romeo von Rodgers, and I believe we're expecting Ian, but if he comes in, we'll go ahead with him as well. Those candidates will be here to join us and answer prepared questions. And also, if you're tuning live, we welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. And if you call in, we will do our best to prioritize your questions, though we will screen calls to ensure questions are not repeated. And we ask that you share your name, the town you live in, and the questions to be directed at all candidates and not just one candidate in particular. You can also submit your questions for future forums online at cctv.org. So we'll go ahead and begin with the questions. And it's going to be, we're going to start with 60 seconds rather, opening statement. And we'll start with our Lieutenant Governor, Sitting Lieutenant Governor, David Zuckerman. I didn't miss.
No, you got it right. You're good. Well, thank you. I'm running to be the Lieutenant Governor again to continue advocating and fighting for a future where working people can thrive and are able to live in dignity with food on their table, a roof over their heads, clean water, good public education, and a climate that will be healthy for our kids. I grew up in the Boston area originally, and with parents who made it clear I could be anything that I wanted to be as long as I worked hard at it and put my head down and studied it and did well. Treat the planet with respect, treat people with respect, no matter where they're from, what their circumstances that they're born into are. Then, I came to Vermont to go to school, and I found a place where people treated each other with respect. People worked across all spectrums to try to make life better for their neighbors and everybody else around them. And I've really enjoyed that and enjoyed being a public servant in that environment, in this community, and across the state. And that's changing, unfortunately, but I will continue to work to bring respect and dignity to the office of Lieutenant Governor, respect and dignity to the world of public service and democracy and governance, and to bring more people into the process, everyday people who don't always have the power that people with more money have. And I look forward to continuing as Lieutenant Governor, bringing more people in for that future that we can build together. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman. And we have now Mr. Rodgers, John Rodgers, I correct?
Yes, thank
you,
Go ahead,
Romeo.
sir. Thank you.
Yep.
As I've traveled around the state, I'm hearing from Vermonters, no matter what political affiliation they have, that they're tired of being crushed by rising rents, spiraling property taxes, unsustainable heating and lighting bills. And if you're tired of these costs, I'm your candidate. I'll be your voice in the State House. I served for 16 years in the State House, 8 in the House and 8 in the Senate as a Democrat. But the Democrats no longer support working class and poor people, and I decided to run as a Republican. My values have not changed, but I could no longer be part of a party that was passing regressive policies such as the energy policies that just added $100 million to our electric bills, and the majority of that money will go to wealthy energy developers. I'm very proud to be supported and endorsed by the most popular governor in the country, Governor Phil Scott, because he would like a lieutenant governor that he can work with, and I'm hoping that you will vote for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodgers. We do appreciate that. I believe we don't have Ian, so we will go on to the next question. It's going to be.
Do we have a clock, or are you?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, because we don't have anything to signal.
I was looking around.
We used to get like a 15-second warning or something, so you know to wrap up.
Believe me, I'm keeping time.
Okay. If you have a way to signal us like 15 seconds, that might be helpful.
Rest assured, just right on the corner.
Okay. Thank you, Romeo.
Yes. Mr. Rodgers, I'm going to ask a question about priorities. What would be your top priority as a lieutenant governor? How would you use the office to improve the lives of Vermonters?
Yeah, affordability is the top priority because nothing else matters if we can't afford to live here. And I think the legislature has driven the cost of living up at a much faster rate than people's incomes. And that's been driving rents and electric bills and property taxes. And the people that I'm talking with around the state are feeling like they can't afford to live here anymore. And we have a serious demographic problem with our kids moving out of state. But when they look at the cost of housing, property taxes, electric bills, and the other cost of owning a house, compared to the income they can make in the area, almost every other state is more affordable. And that's why we're losing so many of our young people. So we have to restructure education funding to bring property taxes down, and we have to stop passing regressive energy policy so that we can keep the cost of our energy down so that people can afford to light and heat their homes. And it's the same with the clean heat standard. The Public Utility Commission has said it's not the right way to go. Hopefully it won't move forward, but the House wanted to pass a bill with no check back. And that would have been disastrous for Vermonters because we know rents are going up just because of the property taxes. And if the landlords had to pay more for oil, then the rents would have gone even up more for heat. And it's making it unaffordable for renters and homeowners alike.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. The same question for you, Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, I think it's three things together: housing, property taxes, and the climate. And affordable housing is number one. And I think it's important to put the reality where it is. Vermont's a highly desirable place to live. We have thousands of people thinking to move here and moving here, cash in hand, driving up the costs. It's not so many of the other factors these last few years. It's been an outrageous land rush from folks farther south. They're avoiding COVID, or they're getting away from climate issues or political climate issues. We have to invest more in housing, but in affordable housing. The price of materials and the price of labor is so high that even if we build more housing, the price isn't going to come down. That's why I supported the House bill that was going to generate $70 million a year to invest in affordable housing across the state, both to help secure temporary housing for those that are now being exited, and also to build that stock of rental properties and ownership properties. We've also seen a lot of long-term rentals become short-term rentals. That has squished the housing market. That has nothing to do with the policies in Montpelier. And then on property taxes, as we'll probably get into more, there are a number of things we can do there. One is around efficiencies between human services and education to save millions of dollars. Second is to deal with the blooming cost of mental health and social services in our schools, which in other states are paid for by state human services, not the property tax. A third is to make the income sensitivity apply across the board so that wealthy people pay the same percentage as working class people. Right now they're paying a lower amount. That would save Vermonters about $30 to $40 million a year, working class folks. And we do have to invest in weatherization and energy policies that are going to help reduce the impacts of climate change. Yes, Vermont's a small state. We can only do so much, but we have to do our part, and we have to work to reduce Vermonters' bills by implementing a policy that will address our climate costs.
Thank you so much for that. The third question is, which you alluded to earlier, property taxes or taxes in general. The question is property taxes and education. So this year, many Vermonters will see double digits in increasing their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day. As a lieutenant governor, which you are sitting a lieutenant governor, how would you approach education funding and property taxes for the fiscal coming year?
Yeah, the coming fiscal year is a big deal. We know that if we'd gone forward with the vetoed bill last year, or the veto, then increases would have been 30% across the board on businesses, small businesses, mechanic shops, you name it. So as hard as it is now, it would have been much harder to retain businesses and help small businesses in Vermont. Going forward, we have to look at a number of things. The income sensitivity, like I just talked about. We have to look at the fact that in 90 communities in Vermont, second homeowners, those people that can afford 2 homes, not just 1, but 2 homes, in 90 towns, they pay a lower property tax rate than primary residences. We have 58,000 second homes in Vermont. We could look at them as a separate class. Right now we have 2 groups, residential property and everything else. Some states have 14 groups. We could have a third group, which is second homes, ask them to pay a progressively increased fee, property tax, especially on those high-end ones, to help alleviate the cost. We could reduce overhead, certainly some by consolidating in the superintendent scale, but that's a pretty small amount relative to these other much bigger costs. We have to look at how human services and education also fail to work together in many communities with double bureaucracy added costs, added hurdles for families with kids, and reduce those hurdles from a bureaucratic perspective, and get earlier intervention for those kids who need early support so that those challenges don't grow into bigger challenges that impact those kids for the rest of their lives. So there's a number of things.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman. John, for the same question, sir.
Yes. First, I'd like to push back on David's 30%. We've looked at that, and I don't believe that that's accurate. I think some people are saying that, but it's also under dispute. But what we do know is that what the legislature forwarded was a double-digit increase in property tax. In many communities, it's up in the 20s. And that's much too high. We've done 38 studies over the years. My opponent's been there for 22 of those years. He actually served on education. The legislature hasn't moved on any of those suggestions in those 38 studies. They cost us millions of dollars. They've really been negligent, and I think it's time for new leadership because the leadership that's there hasn't moved those priorities forward. It's sad that we wasted those millions of dollars and haven't done anything with those studies. One of the things that is happening today, some very wealthy people who have a lot of unearned income get property tax rebates. That's another thing that we need to address. People with multi-million-dollar homes and lots of unearned income, if they show no income, they get property tax rebates on those very expensive homes. That's an easy one to take care of. And then when my opponent talks about the human services and ed fund costs, yes, there's a ton of human services costs. The question is, which fund should they come out of? Because no matter which fund they come out of, taxpayers are going to pay for it. And the bottom line is that we're spending too much, and we have to look at the system from the bottom up and build a system that Vermonters can afford.
Thank you, John. Lieutenant Governor, would you like to respond to, since you've been mentioned name on that question, including the
I appreciate that.
services?
The report was from the Joint Fiscal Office, which is the financial arm of the legislature. John's familiar with it, so if it's in dispute, I guess anything they put out is in dispute. But those were pretty straightforward numbers, what it would have meant to taxes on businesses and farmland and forest land not enrolled in current use, and sort of everything other than the primary residence and those 2 acres. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And we're going to move on to the next question, and that's going to be emergency shelters. Vermont reported 3,295 people experiencing homelessness in 2023, up from 1,110 in 2020. This summer, the state is rolling back its pandemic-era emergency shelter capacity across the state, pushing hundreds of Vermonters onto the streets. How would you approach the need for housing and emergency shelter, and how should we pay for it? John, this goes to you, this question, for the first answer.
Yeah, well, the first thing that would be interesting to know is why the numbers shot up so much under the current leadership in Montpelier. It's truly disturbing that many people are out on the street, and we certainly need to address it. One of the things that concerns me is with the current growth in the cost of living, that we're at risk of putting a lot more people on the street. During the campaign, I talked with a guy who has to serve foreclosures, and he said he's been serving more foreclosures than ever, which is a really bad sign, because where are those people going? If they couldn't afford to keep that house, maybe they're going out on the street as well. So first thing is we have to address the cost of living for the people who are still in housing, so more people don't end up on the street. We have to make sure that somehow, especially families with children, don't get left on the street in the cold, and living in a tent is not appropriate. So there may be a need to reinstate some of the types of housing in the motels and hotels that we were using before. But we need to look for a long-term solution, and we need to make sure that the folks on the street are getting the wraparound services that they need, because we know that many of them are suffering with underlying issues such as mental health and drug addiction. And so it's a complex issue that's going to take a lot of thought. We need to have more suitable housing, whether it's pod communities or some sort of housing that's has to be overseen. There have to be expectations of how people behave in them, and going to have to keep the drug and alcohol use out of them as much as possible. But yeah, it's a huge issue.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. David?
Sure. I think the problem is clear. There's a massive number of people, families with children, people with medical concerns who need electricity to keep some of their medical devices working, and they're being exited. And this has exploded in the last 4 years. There was discussed about leadership in Montpelier. The top leader is our governor. And part of this is looking forward and seeing the problem and then actually doing something about it, not sort of saying, well, we're going to just cut it off at some point and then we'll hope people find places to live. The House bill that would have raised $70 million a year on people making over $500,000 a year, so we're talking about the top 1 or 2% of Vermont, would have raised $70 million a year to build more affordable housing in the long run, while also helping keep people in the hotels and motels or other temporary shelter until we get enough housing for people to move into on a more permanent basis. We know this affects kids and their education and their outcomes. We know this affects health outcomes for people, is to have stable housing. The Senate also was opposed to that, so it's not just the governor, but the governor and the Senate defeated that proposal. I supported that proposal. We aren't going to solve these problems just by sort of wishing they will go away. These problems are also bigger than just here. We know that lots of folks struggled with housing and also the expense of living. It's been talked about with your food bills and your fuel bills. This is happening all across the country. This is inflation. It's neither Biden nor Trump's fault or Phil Scott's fault. COVID disrupted the whole supply chain. And so sometimes the problem is bigger than Vermont, and we have to do what we can here, and I think there's a proposal to address it.
Thank you so much, David. So the next question is criminal justice and public safety, which I think is a very potent issue in our state. This past season, lawmakers increased judicial staff, increased retail theft penalties, and expanded restorative justice practices in Vermont. What are your priorities to advance public safety and criminal justice reform? We'll go with you, David.
Well, first I want to really applaud Governor Scott when a number of years ago, I think it was maybe his beginning of his second term, I'm not exactly sure how far back, he started implementing mental health workers and social workers as a pilot project in Franklin County with some of the state police to go to certain calls when it wasn't so much a law breaking or a major public safety circumstance, but where someone was in need of help. And the question is, what's the best way to help them? And I think we need, and it worked well. And I think we need to expand that, as the governor has, to some other barracks, but also make resources available to local communities, particularly the small ones. Find a way, it didn't work the first time in Burlington because of the mass exodus when the discussion happened, but find a way to make sure we blend social workers with our law enforcement officers to address many of the calls that are made to 911 that are not about violence or major criminal activity, but about someone in distress. So that, to me, is the framework to start with, because we can really reduce the impacts on the community, the negative impacts on those individuals in trauma, and lead to better outcomes. We need to support our law enforcement and fire, but also those community safety liaisons and community safety officers. I supported the Overdose Prevention Center in Burlington. It's been shown all across the world. There's fewer needles in public spaces. There are no overdoses that have been attributed to those locations, and that some people, over time, as they become more comfortable with the person there who's watching out for their safety, who's also then able to provide directions towards support for weaning their substance use disorder. So it's an all-hands approach on deck kind of system. And the last thing I will say is the legislature did increase the penalties for retail theft, which is a huge issue in Burlington and in other communities, but it's still aggregated only by the theft within the county, and I think that has to be expanded across the state so that you don't reach near the limit in one county and move to another and continue to do that. That's gaming the system, and that's not okay.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate that. John, go ahead for the same question.
This is the second biggest concern I hear all around the state. First is affordability. Second is public safety. So the first thing is I was involved in criminal justice reform way back when, in the 2000s, when we had massive prison overcrowding, and we got a lot of nonviolent people out of prison, which was a great step, and we led the nation there. We need to use restorative justice and drug courts whenever we can. They've been very effective and actually have proven to reduce recidivism. But I think my opponent and I disagree a little bit on policing, and at least from one of your statements from VPR, he supported some sort of defunding the police, and his quote is, "It's important to define defunding as it doesn't mean eliminate funding at all, so we need to shift our funding." And I will agree with him that we need the social workers involved, but I would just draw everyone's attention to what happened in Burlington, cutting down from 100 police officers to 60 police officers. One of the most striking things I've heard around the state this year is the number of people telling me they no longer come to Burlington. And I used to come to Church Street a lot. I don't come as much anymore. I have a friend that has a business downtown. He said his business is off 20%. There's a serious problem down here, and it's not just perception. There's open drug use, there's homelessness, there's criminal activity, there's drug-related violence, shootings in the street and stabbings. Social workers can't handle that. Yes, social workers are the ones that are needed to be called when you have a mental health problem. But when we have shootings in the park, we need police. And the police are stretched very, very thin right now. And so we have to be careful that we have enough presence of law enforcement in every community to deal with the people that are dangerous and social workers can't take care of.
Thank you so much. And since you had mentioned, David, on the policing part of it, would you like to respond to that, sir?
Well, let's be clear. I wasn't on city council or the government of Burlington at the time, but also the idea had been, as some people left the force, to fill a few of those positions over time, and it was supposed to be gradual, to not be a sudden drop like was just talked about. So, how it executed and went about is very different than what the plan had been. And then it's really important, I think, throughout the debate, we'll hear that we should fund this and we should fund that without shifting funds, but Vermont's unaffordable and taxes need to be lower. You kind of can't have your cake and eat it too, which sometimes is the way it sounds on some of these issues as we go through these debates. So yeah, my thought had been for a few percentage of the resources to go towards teaming up. It's not that social workers would go to a gun violence crime. It's actually about teaming up where it's appropriate to go to those calls that need a different kind of intervention. So I think the nuance matters, and I think investment matters.
Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to the next question. It's going to be more of a lightning round. We're going to start with you, John. This is going to be a yes or no question, though you can elaborate if you so wish. Should private schools be funded with public dollars, John?
There are some private schools that have been used as public schools, and I think they're doing a really good job up in like the Northeast Kingdom.
Okay, and David?
Well, in those instances, I think it works, but also no, unless their doors are truly open to everyone. Many private schools don't meet the needs of everyone and don't enter everybody.
Okay. Do you support, David, do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and John?
From what I know, yes. I would like to look at the details more, but yes, I think it's a good idea.
Okay. And John, should biomass, burning wood, quote unquote, play a role in emission reduction strategies?
Absolutely.
Okay, and David?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Do you support a statewide ban on assault weapon, David?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and John?
Civilians should not have automatic weapons.
Okay. And John, did Governor Scott overstep his authority by appointing Zoe Sanders as interim education secretary?
No.
Okay, and David?
Well, I think he did, and he also went against the will of the advice and consent of the Senate. Okay.
And David, where do you get your news from?
Quite a few sources, of course, CCTV, Vermont Public, my campaign team, also Digger, and then 7 Days, and sometimes Channel 3 and Channel 5, but I don't actually have a TV, so it's usually on my computer when I catch different
variety.
Yeah.
And John?
Yeah, I do like VPR, NPR. I check my computer every morning and look at WCAX and then have a news app that takes me to a whole bunch of different places.
Thank you, John. And John, do you ride the bus?
In West Glover. I've stood out front of the house for a long time, but it never came by.
Yeah, I understand.
No bus service in Glover.
Okay, I understand. And David?
Very rarely, on very rare occasion from Heinsberg back in, but even that service might be getting cut soon. But it's a really important thing to have for so many people that can't afford a car.
Agree. And David, what is your favorite ice cream in Vermont?
Well, I often get some homemade ice cream at Shelburne Sugar Works on my way back or forth from Burlington to Heinsberg.
Very cool. And John?
I like all ice cream.
Yeah. You scream ice cream, we all scream for ice cream,
I'll
right?
take it all.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. And we're going to move on to the next question, Overdose Crisis, which I think earlier kind of intertwined a little bit with the fourth question. So 231 people, and this goes for David, 231 people died from an overdose in Vermont in 2023, with 95% of overdoses involving fentanyl. What must be done to prevent overdoses and promote addiction recovery and deter illegal sales of opioids in Vermont?
Well, there's so many complex levels to this, but I did support the Overdose Prevention Center, Harm Reduction Center pilot in Burlington, so I hope that succeeds and does well. I was at Jenna's Promise before Jenna's Promise existed, visiting with the Tatros as they were imagining the idea, and I had said to them, this could really be a model not only for Vermont but for the country, and we've seen tremendous success there. We need to think about ways whether we could replicate that around the state, because not everybody can travel that far to be a part of really what's as much as a year-long program with residential space, job training, social support, and counseling. Are we still in the 10-second version, or are these the longer versions?
Just the longer version.
Okay, and I realize I should stop if that was the case. And so we need to do that more around the state and continue to invest in the roots of the problem. A lot of this came from drugs that were prescribed to people. I had an employee that unfortunately, before he came to work for me, I didn't realize it, had a hand injury, got painkillers, and became addicted. And eventually you lead to heroin because it's cheaper. But housing, stability, economic stability, these are all parts of the path, unfortunately, towards substance use disorder. And so it's all of the above.
Thank you so much. And John, same question, overdose crisis?
Yeah, it is a complex problem, but first and foremost, we need to give law enforcement and the judiciary the tools and funding that they need to crack down on the drug dealers and drug traffickers that are bringing it into the state. We know that's a serious problem. I've heard from some folks that there's members of some pretty big and dangerous gangs here now, and the problem seems to be getting worse. They seem to look at us like a easy target, and they're transporting more and more drugs here. I agree with David on, I've spent a lot of time with the Tatros up at Jenna's Promise. It's a wonderful program, and I've talked with the ladies that have made it through the program, and the training is so important because once they're through the other side of their addiction, they actually have a store to run, they have a coffee shop to run, so they get, used to getting up in the morning, getting their job done, and it's so important. And it also, gives people self-worth when they're going to a job, they're getting paid, and so it's a wonderful program, and I'm pleased to have the support of the Tatros. They are actually putting another one up in Derby. They're working on another one, and it is a model that should be replicated, and hopefully their models will prove out, and I don't think that they want to take it all on themselves. They got a lot going on. They also have a big construction business. So it's something that I think other agencies and other people like them around the state could pick up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we're going to move on to climate change. And John, this goes for you. Vermont greenhouse emissions per capita are among the highest in the Northeast, driven largely by heating and transportation. How would you think Vermont should approach decreasing its emissions in those sectors?
Yeah, so we have to move to more renewable energy, but we have to do it in a way that's responsible. Currently, what's happening in the renewable energy sector is not being responsible for the planet. Lithium is being mined in the Congo. 70% of the world's lithium comes from there, and it's being mined by child and slave labor. That then goes to China and gets made into batteries with no environmental standards and no labor standards. So when we use something that is built with child and slave labor and no environmental standards, and it's doing damage to an environment and the people on the other side, I don't believe it's helping the planet. So we have to make sure all of the things that we're sourcing for our energy transformation are made ethically and are not doing damage on the other side of the planet. So that's my first focus. I did talk with a solar developer who is able to source all his panels in the US, built in the US, so it can be done. I think a lot of the business is driven by profit, and unfortunately the Chinese panels are cheaper, so a lot of people are still using those. But when you destroy people in an environment on the other side of the world, you can't call it green when it gets here.
Thank you so much, John. David, for the same question.
Well, I definitely think we need to focus on more renewable energy here at home in Vermont. We all like to turn on the lights or turn on the heat or drive our cars, but the vast majority of the impact from that is exported. Whether it's energy at peak loads on gas plants in Connecticut in primarily black and brown communities where they've been dealing with breathing that exhaust. I agree with John, certainly, that we should repatriate more solar panels in Vermont, in the United States, being built here. And with lithium, I think they found a big source in the Southwest, but there's still questions about how to get that out of the ground well. But President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris helped get the law passed to move a lot of manufacturing back into this country. So keeping the jobs here under our standards. It's a hard thing to do, to both have high standards and produce renewable energy and have it be economical. And this is back to the wanting to have it all ways. So yes, we need to do this. We need to consider having it in our backyards where we see the ramifications of the use of our energy, so that maybe we also consider using less. But we have to make the investment. Now, I would like to see the investment be made in a more progressive way. There's no doubt there's elements of our tax policy that have really hit working people much harder. Fair enough. I've advocated for a much more progressive tax system so that the people that pay are the people that can afford to pay. We've had a system that's been crushing working class people both in Vermont and across the country with our federal policies and our tax policies, and Vermont has borne the brunt of it as wealthier people with that extra money are buying up our houses and driving up the costs far beyond anything that state policies are doing.
Thank you so much. And I believe, let me see here. Okay. And I believe we're moving on to the next question. I don't know if, John, you answered already. The other, I actually started with you.
Yeah,
But
so,
okay.
yeah.
All right. Sorry. It's
all
been a long day.
Yeah, agreed.
We had a debate yesterday, one today, and another one tomorrow.
I started at 4:30 this morning.
Yeah, exactly.
This is going to be a healthcare question. I think we're going to start.
safely.
Yeah.
We're going to start with you, David, if that's okay with you. One of the primary drivers in rising school budgets and affordability issues in Vermont is increasing costs of healthcare insurance. What can the state do to reduce the cost of healthcare and meet the healthcare needs of Vermonters?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue first and foremost, we have more of a sick care system than a healthcare system. So as an organic farmer, and I know John's also an organic farmer, I grow produce and chicken and pork and eggs. What we eat is critically important. What we breathe is critically important. Having a house and a roof over our head with stable housing is critically important. And so the Housing First model is one of the pieces of reducing healthcare costs. More primary care physicians and preventative medicine folks, along with nutritionists and folks that can help people eat better and live better, will help with our healthcare system. But fundamentally, I think our system is extremely inefficient. We need to move towards a universal healthcare system. It's been shown all over the world, particularly in Western Europe, where they have universal healthcare systems. They spend less per person and they have better outcomes. And we have a challenge because we're an older state, so it might be a little above the national average, but there's no way that we can't, in the long run, save money by moving to a universal healthcare system, provide better services for folks, and actually help our small businesses, who many of which can't afford to offer health insurance. So you've got this churn of employees as they get to late 20s, early 30s, family years, other issues. And so I think universal healthcare is good for healthcare, saving money, and good for our small businesses.
Thank you so much. And John, I'm going to give you the last answer before we're technically supposed to wrap it up, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it's a tough issue. We do not want to lose our small regional hospitals. Nobody needs to be hours away from a hospital when they have loved ones in them. So that is key. One of the things that's been tried in other jurisdictions is having EMTs and ambulance services do kind of like the old doctors used to do, house calls, right? They're set up, they're not busy all the time, they're on duty. A lot of time while they're on duty, if they don't have a call, they're just hanging out at the shop. And so these models in some places have saved a tremendous amount of money, especially when you look at older people and folks who have trouble with mobility, because they don't have to find somebody to give them a ride to the doctor's office or the hospital. These guys can show up, give them the care they need, and then move on. So I think that's a great model. Ultimately, in the United States, we spend more tax dollars on health insurance to cover 30% of the population than Europe spends to cover 100% of our population. So we're already spending the money, and the federal government has been negligent in not spending the money properly and covering everybody. This is where my opponent and I disagree. I believe Vermonters are already overtaxed, and I don't believe there's any way a small state with an older population can afford to go towards single payer on their own.
Okay.
I just think it's unaffordable.
Thank you so much. And before we do the 30-second closing statement, would you like to quickly rebuttal or?
No, I don't think
Right.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was fine.
Okay.
Just different opinions.
All
it's
right, so
fine.
we'll do a quick John start 30-second
Sure.
end of statement, and then
Sure.
Dave. Yeah.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for all the folks that are watching. I'm John Rodgers. I'm hoping to earn your vote for Lieutenant Governor. As I said before, I am endorsed by the most popular governor in the United States, and I'm looking forward to working with him on affordability. Rents and property taxes are out of control. The legislature has implemented regressive electricity policies that are putting the burden on poor and working class people, and those type of policies need to be stopped. Affordability is the key issue, because if we can't afford to live here, nothing else matters. Thank you.
Thank you, John. David, go ahead.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. It's always great to chat with folks. Please feel free to reach out to my campaign, Zuckerman, FORVT.com, ZuckermanForVermont.com, if you have follow-up questions or want to talk to me about any of the issues we've talked about tonight. I've served as your Lieutenant Governor for 6 of the last 8 years. I did serve in the House and Senate for a long time. I worked across the aisles on GMO labeling, Lyme disease, raising the minimum wage, which is critical when it comes to affordability. I've supported progressive tax policies so that working people don't get hit as hard. I haven't always won those arguments, but I will continue to fight with you and for you to bring down some of those taxes that have become regressively just super challenging on working class folks. I've been a leader on the climate. I've got Madeline Cunan's endorsement. I also have the endorsement of every union, every environmental group, Let's Grow Kids, organizations that are working to improve people's lives every day, raising wages, fighting for our kids to have a good, healthy future, and I'd love to have your support. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, John, for this in-depth conversation and answering questions in the lightning round. That was awesome to know that you guys may or may not take the bus. So I appreciate it.
We don't live in the dense area.
I'll keep waiting for it to come by, Romeo. You send one up my way.
We need more buses to help fight the climate, you know?
Yes, gentlemen, thank you very much. And thank you for tuning into Town Meeting TV, ongoing coverage of local candidates, local budgets, and ballot items, rather. You can find this and many like it, more forums rather, at cctv.org/general or on Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. Don't forget to cast your ballot in the general election on or before November 5th, and then tune in to Town Meeting TV for results recap show that evening. Or contact your local clerk to find out how you can obtain a ballot to register to vote. Thank you for tuning in and have a good night.